Hello, everyone, and slushy greetings from our studio here in Helsinki. My name is Max, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the last Node by Slush community event of this year. In this session, we will have the CEO and co-founder of Wolt, Miki Kuusi. He will share his journey on building the company to its unicorn valuation. The session is moderated by Amy Lewin, the deputy editor at Sifted. It's going to be an exciting 45 minutes ahead of us. The session will start with a fireside and will be continued by a Q&A. You can leave your questions in the Q&A box for Miki and Amy to pick up. We also encourage you to share your learnings by tweeting and sharing with the hashtag NodeBySlush. I think that's enough babbling from me. Let's get this started. Amy, the floor is yours, and enjoy the session.
Thank you. I'm Amy Lewin, Deputy Editor of Sifted, and I'm here with Miki, who I'm sure you've all heard of many times before, who's not only the founder of Wolt, but also the founder of Slush. Wolt is, I'm going to apologise for pronouncing it with my English accent, now available in 23 countries, 100 cities, and has over 1,000 employees. So Miki's been running this company for longer than probably many of the listeners have been running their companies. So if you're going through some growing pains, I'm sure he has been through them too. So that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on in this session, is kind of, okay, Wolt is a unicorn now, but it wasn't always, and what does kind of the journey to get there really look like from the founder's perspective. So Miki, you got into food delivery kind of before there was even a food delivery industry. You know, we've all heard of your competitors, we've all used them many times, but and it's one of those sectors that's become kind of known for the kind of growth at all costs model. Is that the route you took, or kind of how's your journey been in terms of that?
Yeah, so when we founded Wolt back in 2014, like our original hypothesis was that, for, the way that, local services and offline industries would go online, would happen one way or the other. And we kind of figured that as the restaurant was the biggest local service, we kind of thought that the restaurant would be the gateway to, figuring out how local services are going to look like when, offline services are becoming online and offline services. So we kind of started with the restaurant. And we very quickly learned and realized that the key to the restaurant was actually delivery. Like the key to take the restaurant online, get your foot between the door was, to do delivery on behalf of restaurants for, the sheer majority of restaurants that didn't used to do delivery. And around us, there were a lot of companies doing delivery of everything. And over the same time, we saw those companies effectively become restaurant delivery companies, because the magical thing for the restaurant was delivery, and the magical thing for delivery was restaurant, because eating is such a high frequency use case. So these kind of two models almost like collided. I remember when we founded the company, I knew of Postmates and DoorDash in the States, but they were delivering everything. And I hadn't even heard of Deliveroo until we founded the company, because it was like this small startup in the UK, only active in London, doing something in food delivery, which we considered to be only one small part of the restaurant. So it's funny when you look at it in hindsight, like the industry was still, so young, no one really knew how it would go. And then in 2015, 16, and 17, this massive industry just, sprung up around us. So it looked very different back then.
And you've always kind of, you and your investors have kind of talked a lot about your focus on the unit economics, which is obviously a kind of a controversial point when we're talking about food delivery. Kind of the endless question is, can these companies ever actually make money? What's your approach there?
Yeah, so we just started in a very difficult market. If you look at most of our peers internationally, they usually started in a big home market like UK, Germany, United States, China. And as the market is just massive, they were able to reach high levels of venture capital very early to go after that market opportunity. And what everyone talked about in 2015 to 2017 was land grab. Who's going to grab the land? You need to be quick, you need to be first. Whereas we started in a very small market that was very difficult to get right. We have some of the highest labor costs in the world in the Nordics. We have some of the lowest income disparity in the world, meaning that, the difference between the person ordering the food, the person cooking the food, the person delivering the food is very small. We have small cities, we have low population density, we have very limited kind of delivery and takeaway industries as a starting point. So like we just came from this kind of harsh environment to do what we do. And no one would fund a broken business model, with the promise that Helsinki is going to be massive. So we just needed to figure out a model that was able to find efficiency with very low levels of order density, with very high levels of labor cost, with very small countries and very small sizes of cities. So if you look at us from 2015 to 2017, we were basically an R&D operation, focusing on productizing last mile delivery. And I mean, we have 180 people today doing product and engineering in the company, and less than 30 work on consumer. So as a customer, when you're looking at companies like us, you kind of look at the top of the iceberg and you kind of miss that, what companies like us do is massively about all the other things. Like this is a real-time logistics optimization company, a logistics company first and foremost that we're building that also happens to have an app for consumers to, order food.
And
that's the real underlying difficulty.
Did you always have that kind of pitch ready for investors? You raised your first kind of big proper VC round in 2016 when you raised 12 million from EQT. Was that the direction you were heading in there, or is that something that you've kind of figured out along the way?
So we were always a product and technology company at heart. Like we still have the highest rated food delivery app for consumers globally on Apple and Google Store. So we were always a product and technology company at heart. And then when we realized that, the magical product market fit for the restaurant was delivery, we kind of doubled down on that. We kind of figured that, for us to win, we need to be able to build the best delivery experience in the world and the most efficient delivery experience in the world. So it was something that we kind of figured out on the way. When we raised our Series A, like that round was specifically raised to be able to, build the product and the technology, build a playbook for scaling, and start to do kind of rapid expansion. But like as said, like it was still very early in the industry, so little did we know like how the next few years would look like. Like Uber came to the market later on with Ubereats, Take It Easy, that was originally from France. They were unable to secure a round of financing under competition from Uber and Deliveroo, so they went bankrupt. I think this was in 2016. So like there were like multiple, phases to this industry. Even if you look at DoorDash is now making an IPO and has like a majority share of the food delivery market in the US, like they were struggling over a couple of years back there. So like this industry is not a straight line that has just gone, very predictably. It's had several phases along the way.
And how do you kind of cope with that as a founder? I imagine every time, or maybe especially in the early days, every time one of your competitors raises money, you're kind of like, shit, like now they've got all this capital, where are they going to expand? How do you kind of personally cope with that and keep a level head and not sort of just, frantically run out there and chuck a term sheet at any VC who comes knocking?
So like the way I think about this is that if you are doing something worthwhile, there will be competition. If you have a massive opportunity that you're working on, there will be smart, well-funded competition. If you want to be a startup founder, you have to become comfortable, competing every step of the way, every day of the year. Like that's simply how it is. What I've found about founders is that oftentimes founders tend to think that everyone else's businesses are easy and don't have competition, and theirs is the most competitive one, and they're kind of alone in this like competitive like nature of their industry. And oftentimes like every industry has competition, like every company has competition, and you need to be able to deal with that. On a personal level, like, when I was a young CEO of Slush, like I noticed that like, I had this kind of almost need like, to keep up the momentum and the positive feeling in the team when we were going through these rapid phases of like growth, and there was a lot of uncertainty in the early years. So I would oftentimes like overshare the positive news, the positive developments, the exciting things. And then I would keep all the difficult things, the things I was afraid of and concerned about, to myself. And that's a very heavy, way to build a company. I see a lot of like first-time CEOs, feel the need to do this. So when we founded Wolt, like I decided from the get-go that, I'm always going to share the things that I'm concerned about, with the rest of my co-founders, with some of my key investors, my chairman, and then later on kind of my management team. So like, just having that kind of culture of, we're in this together. We all want to succeed. We all want to work on the things that are difficult. And having that mindset that you're not alone, that you're sharing, like, nothing that you are truly concerned about should be only on your shoulders. It becomes a very heavy burden to bear. And also, like, you have smart people around you, like, you're supposed to be doing this together. So allow them to also think about the tough problems and help you solve them. So I think that's one key thing that has helped me along the journey, not bearing the burden alone.
When it comes to kind of building that team around you, when we spoke before, you mentioned that you hired somebody who used to be at Uber, and that was kind of a key moment for you because it helped you think about how you were going to expand and what your approach to this food, delivery land grab was going to be. Tell us a bit about that, how that came about and what impact that had.
Yeah, so like originally we were just like fluffy software startup coming out of Helsinki that was building like, technology for restaurants and technology for consumers, without actually having to deal with like, a big part of the operations and the delivery side of the equation and customer support and all of these things. So when we went to delivery, I kind of very quickly realized that, we need to become a logistics company. We need to figure out like how to set up operations in cities and countries and so forth. Like we can't be like a gaming company, which is, sitting in an HQ and, just magically letting customers and merchants use the platform. Like we need to go where people are. Like this is a hyper local business. So I kind of realized that very early. And like the controversial thing I did back then was that I recruited and found people, both as advisors and as employees, that came from a very different kind of culture, that came from a very different kind of background. And I kind of forced our culture to learn, that other side of the coin. If I look at Wolt today, like we're a marriage of a product and operations company. That's what you have to do in our industry to succeed. That's what e-commerce is ultimately about. One of the key advisors I took was Case Coolen. That's why we chose EQT Ventures as our lead investors in Series A. So he was the kind of legendary CEO of Booking.com, early growth advisor of Uber that kind of helped them figure out their playbook. And Case gave us the kind of the DNA for how to think about expansion. Like he told us that, unit economics is the number one most important thing. If you don't get that right, you're only going to be scaling losses. When you do expansion, only do one market at a time because you're going to make so many mistakes that you don't want to do them in 5 places at the same time. Do one by one, you learn, you refine your model, you make new mistakes. And then once you have figured out the playbook for expansion, then you can do many at the same time. And then I hired like Patrick Studner, who was our COO in the end of 2016, who had done like 3.5 years of expansion at Uber. And he had just like this mindset of what it is like to build an expansion company, what it is like to go to new markets. What does a general manager look like? What does a team look like? How do you kind of balance between product and global operations and local operations and the KPIs and so forth? But he also came from a very radically different culture of ours. And that produced a lot of clashes in those years. But I think like the testament of that was that we were able to ultimately develop our own culture when it came to also doing operations and expansion. It's very different from Uber's, but we kind of learned from their kind of thinking when it came to what it is like to build a high growth expansion company. And Uber learned theirs from Booking.
And how did you manage that internally? I mean, I was the first employee at my 20-person company, and I'm already, you can already feel stuff's changing. How did you manage that, internally? How did you keep people who'd been there right from the start happy, or do you sometimes kind of have to accept that a company has reached a new stage, and that means different people need to be involved and things need to run differently?
So growth is about pain. So like there's a reason why people talk about growth pain, because growth is painful when you're growing fast enough. And when you're trying to figure out or having to figure out like entirely new things, entirely new types of, things that you never imagined when you founded the company, like, those are going to be painful, those things to figure out. Like I saw someone commenting something about recruiting. Like I still remember when I hired my first recruiter and I was like, I have absolutely no idea what a great recruiter looks like. I was completely in the dark. And I remember the pain of having to hire what I was told is the most important hire of my early days without any idea what that would mean. And I was trying to learn, I was trying to, talk with people and trying to understand what consists of a great recruiter. And that's a lot of pain you go through when you're constantly in your uncomfortability zone, trying to learn, while you're at the same time, doing those things that you're learning. So it's not easy. I think to the credit of our team, like we've always had an extremely resilient team. So I told our team that, for us to be able to succeed, it's not enough that we build the best product in the world. We also need to build the best operations in the world and become an expansion company. And this is simply something that if we want to build this company that all of us want to build, this is something we have to accept and this is something we have to adopt. And I'm proud to say that if I look at, our team from the early days, like most of those people are still around. So they learned as part of this process and became even better at what they do. So I think like if you're in a growth company, again, one of the most important things you have to learn in every role is adaptability. You just have to accept that we don't know what this journey is going to require of us. And you have to learn to do the things that, come along the way. Whether it's, figuring out recruiting or how to do finance or how to set up HR or how to do expansion or how to find the balance between local and global operations and all of these things.
And what is the best way of learning? Is it talking to other people who've been through this? Is it doing an MBA in your evenings? What actually are ways that you personally go to when you're like, shit, I've never hired a recruiter before?
One of the best advice I've ever been given on recruiting came from Case Coolen, like the former Booking CEO. Like he gave us fundamental advice. I don't think we would be here without the sessions that we spent in Amsterdam together with him talking about the fundamentals of building a scale up. And he said that, a lot of times when people start to recruit people for, building up or expanding their business, they start to look for people who've done it before. But very few people in life do, build up a business from scratch or build up like a certain size of a business from scratch 2 times. Most of it only do once. And what you want to look for is not those people who have done it, but you want to look at what they were like before they did it. And you're looking for the people that are going to do it for the first time with you. You're looking for the people before they did it, and you're investing into their potential to actually figure it out with your company. Like the best way to learn these things is by doing. Like the reality is that there's so many things that you have to do as a new company in a new industry that no one has really figured out. No one has really tried. Like I remember in 2012 when I was working with Supercell, no one had experience about free-to-play games. Like, customer acquisition, how it's done today, no one had truly experience about how it is done today. So you just have to hire people that are capable of learning, the things that you have to learn as a company to be able to succeed. That's the difficult thing. And what you ultimately need is smart, capable people that have this kind of mindset of learning, that kind of attitude of like, we need to figure it out. We'll figure it out. And you make mistakes, and along the way, you become better and better and better. And ultimately, you can become world-class. But that's a journey. You don't start there.
When you've mentioned Case a few times, did you kind of deliberately pick EQT because you knew about him, or was it kind of a nice coincidence that it turns out he was super useful? And in terms of that, is there any kind of advice you have around picking your investors wisely, not just for the check that they write you?
We were one of the first investments of EQT Ventures. They hadn't even launched their fund back then. Everyone advises you against taking a new investor without any track record, because you don't know how they're going to be like, are they good, so forth. But I've always trusted my intuition about people. Like I've followed my intuition about people to many different places. And like when we ran into Case and we kind of got to talk with him about, the journeys of Booking.com and Uber and like all of the things that he had kind of learned along those journeys, we just realized that there is so much we can learn here. Like I think the thing about advice is that it makes learning more quick. You still make your own mistakes, you still have to learn your own things, but it makes it quicker to realize that where you're going right and where you're going wrong. So you almost like anyway have to do the same mistakes, but you spend less time on them. You realize earlier that, oh, this is the thing they were talking about. So it speeds up your learning process. We chose EQT Ventures, like we had other options on the table, and we chose them because we saw that, Case could help us point the way to the company that we needed to build, to the company that we wanted to build. That was our kind of Series A. Our Series B was led by 83 North. Laurel Bowden, who led our round, she's on the board of Just Eat from Series B until IPO. And they were the first investor with industry experience, and also the first investor that were not like ex-entrepreneurs and operators, but professional growth investors. And, we learned so much from them about, what does a management team look like? What kind of people do you need to hire? What were the gaps in our team? About how to think about the industry, how to think about competition, how to think about financing. Iconic, which led our Series C alongside Highland Europe, we just felt that there was a cultural fit. Like Iconic invest in product companies. Their portfolio included, out of our top 10 software products we use as a company as Wolt, 8 were Iconic investments. everything from basically Adyen to Intercom. And their kind of culture of like how they wanted to support founders and management teams and so forth. So ultimately, like I always think when I'm choosing investors, I'm looking for people that are cultural fits to the team, similarly to employees, like people who have a similar mindset about what we want to build here and how we want to build it. And I also look for investors that are going to be helping the next step of what I need to do. Like our Series D was led by Goldman Sachs because we knew that the next step we're going towards is an IPO, and we knew that they can help us when it comes to building a company that is ready to IPO. The due diligence they actually did for our Series D basically was the groundwork of our IPO readiness, all the things we have to do in order to go public.
So it's now, we have time for questions. I'm just going to remind the audience to please ask them in the Q&A, not the chat. But that feeds nicely into a question we've got from Rita, which is, where do you see Wolt in 10 years? So on the stock market, is that the short answer?
Yeah, so like we've always wanted to build a strong standalone European like internet company. That's what we want to build. Through Slush and through other things I've done, like I've always thought that Europe should stand up when it comes to being able to produce its own companies, its own technology companies. We're way behind China and the US when it comes to building like internet companies. So that's what we want to build. And to build a strong standalone company, like the ultimate journey is to go public, because like I have venture investors and they have their business model, and their business model is to ultimately exit their shareholding. And if you want to build a strong standalone company, the way to allow them to do that is the best way to do that is through the public markets. But we're not really in a hurry anywhere. One of the things we always look for in investors is people who are long-term. We are not a short-term company. We're not looking to go anywhere. We're not looking to exit this thing to the highest bidder. Like we could have done so many, many times, but we've always decided not to, because we see what we can build. If I think 5-10 years ahead, like I believe that people don't really realize how big companies like us will become, because we're effectively talking about like how will people get things in the future. Like I don't think the future of retail is going to be an Amazon warehouse outside of the city. I think the future of retail is going to be that you can get like anything that you can go into a shop and buy in a city will be also available for delivery in like 30-35 minutes to your home. I think the future of how people buy Nike shoes is going to be that you can order any pair of Nike shoes in a service like Wolt, delivered in like 30 minutes to your home. Like I think that's where like ultimately retail and commerce is going to go. It just makes sense because it's the path of most convenience, and it's a path towards convenience that we as consumers take. And these decades that are going through is basically a transition process of internet taking over industries, one industry at a time. Every worker going online, every business going online, every dish in a restaurant, every item in a boutique store. Like ultimately, every industry is becoming an online industry because it's just makes sense. It's the most efficient way to produce the best possible customer experience. And why restaurant? Because people eat almost 100 times a month. So you're relying on this high frequency use case to build a strong foundation. Like I always thought since we founded Wolt that like the restaurant would be to us what books were to Amazon. It's this kind of perfect category where you're able to build a brand, a base of customers, your kind of operations, your kind of business that allows you to invest back into expanding. But ultimately, this is about like building the future of like e-commerce. This is about taking the city online. This was originally our vision. We just didn't realize that e-commerce and delivery, they live hand to hand. In the world of e-commerce, people don't want to go to places to get things anymore. They want things to come to them. And
picking up on a question from Bob, kind of how likely do you reckon it is that this becomes a market? I mean, if this becomes just e-commerce, and e-commerce, as we've seen from COVID, is just going to take off even faster than people thought, how kind of likely is it Amazon just owns this, or what Bob's asking is, several delivery platforms just buy up all the others, which is kind of what's already happened in food delivery. How do you see that playing out?
So Amazon is in a difficult position. I don't think they can buy a lot of companies. Like they invested, a minority stake into Deliveroo, and that was almost blocked by competitive authorities. I don't think Amazon can buy a DoorDash or an Ubereats in the States. Like I think for Amazon, the situation is the same as the situation would be for Facebook without acquiring WhatsApp and Instagram. like, the consumption and customers are moving like to the next thing. And even though the previous thing is still growing, it's massively profitable, it's a strong foundation, like, ultimately, world is about where consumers will be. And in social media, that's WhatsApp and Instagram, instead of like on a desktop web-based social network. So I think Amazon is in a similar situation. The difficulty of food delivery, why is food delivery a consolidation market, is that the locking effect of restaurants on the supply side and customers on the demand side is super powerful, because you need to have the right supply of restaurants to be able to get customers. But if you have a lot of customers and supply, your customer like revenue that you're providing to the supply of merchants will lock those in. So it's very difficult to break into a market where someone has already gotten to scale and built this kind of two-sided marketplace of like merchants and customers. So as a result, it's very expensive to be a late mover to the market. The one exception we've seen is, being, someone coming in with a McDonald's exclusive, first time offering that to the market. So that can be unique enough of a supply that you get to build the demand that allows you to build the rest of supply. But I think that's one of the rare exceptions to the rule we see. As a result, it's always been better to buy companies instead of outcompeting companies, because outcompeting companies can be almost impossible. It's very difficult to follow in this industry to someone who's already built deep roots as a company. As a result, what happens is that you build strong regional portfolios of cities and markets as a company in our industry. And that's ultimately the competition. I think what will happen is that there will be a lot of consolidation of companies consolidating markets. There's 4 players in a market. Maybe it only makes sense to have 2. So what's going to happen is that there's a massive competition until you have a number 1 and a number 2 emerge. Maybe the number 3 and number 4 get acquired. Maybe they shut down their business. But there's ultimately going to be a couple of players, I think, in every market. But it's not going to be I don't think it's going to be a consolidation of everyone. Like Walmart does not own every grocery operator in the world. It's a bizarre idea if you even think about it. So this is not this is not a global networks effect business like Google or Facebook, where who has the biggest critical mass globally is going to provide better experience, a better service for everyone globally. This is a local competition. You win a city, it doesn't mean you win the next city. So it's city by city by city that you have to win. I think the end result is going to be that we have 5 to 10 companies that are going to be really big businesses and public companies that are going to have their strong regional portfolios and compete in other places instead of 1 or 2 or 3 global entities.
Okay. And a question from Thomas, kind of, how do you actually take on a new market? So you've recently expanded to Germany, also Japan. Maybe talk us through, he wants to know if you create SWAT teams going from country to country. What is kind of operation plan?
Yeah, so we have a specific organization for launching new markets, which we call expansion. The simple way to understand expansion is that it consists of 2 types of roles. One role is what we call a launcher. So a launcher is basically a mobile general manager. They're a person that is responsible for helping us greenlight a market. So we have a greenlighting process of how we decide where we expand, which includes a lot of desktop study and analytical study, as well as going to the market and actually understanding, the characteristics of the cities, the competition, the consumer behavior, restaurants, so forth. Once we have greenlit a market, the launcher will basically move to that market, and they're allowed to leave when the market has been successfully launched, the team has been hired, the team has been onboarded, and they're able to run the market without the launcher. This usually takes anywhere between 2 and 18 months. I think our longest launch has lasted 18 months. The shorter ones are 2-3 months. Then the other half of the expansion team is expansion support or launch support. So that's basically a SWAT team that flies in the weeks leading up to launch, that helps, train everyone, onboard everyone, launch the city, make sure we set up everything right. We kind of install the culture of the company to the market. We install the right kind of customer support, the right kind of way to work with couriers and restaurants and to acquire customers and so forth. And it's almost like a SWAT team that spends a couple of months in the market, just helping us launch in the right way. The launcher is effectively a recruiter. What you have to understand about scale-ups is that scale-ups are glorified recruiting operations. What is a company like us? What do? We recruit people. Like you're a massive recruiting operation where you just come up with a way to do high scale recruiting, high speed recruiting. At the same time, you have to become very thorough when it comes to what kind of people you recruit. How do you make sure they're the right people? How do you onboard them? How do you part ways with the ones that don't fit into what you do? And like, for instance, like before COVID-19 started, Wolt was a 700-person company. This is in February this year. Today, we're around 1,800 people. So we've hired over 1,000 employees at our offices in 23 countries in the last half a year or so over COVID-19. This is what companies like us do. We hired in the last month alone 200 people. It means that we had, close to 10 people start every day in the company.
How do you cope with that? What practically happens to make sure that works, that, no one at the company even knows what they're doing because everyone's only been there for 2 weeks or whatever? How does that kind of scale of operation work?
So there's two modes of recruitment that happen in a company like us. There's setting up new teams and there's hiring people to existing teams. Those are the two modes of recruitment. The latter one is easier. So this is how we grow our engineering teams, for instance. We never set up a new team and hire a bunch of new people to that team. Like what we do is that we set up a new team, we hire internally to that team, and then we hire, one or two people into all of the teams we hired internally from, as well as the new team. So there will never be like a new team in engineering. It's always like consists of, older like veterans and then a few new people. And then what you're basically doing is that you're kind of monitoring that no team gets too many people hired in too short of a phase, and no team gets too many new people hired in too short of a phase. So that's like, for instance, how we scale engineering and how we scale country teams and so forth. The other point is setting up new teams. And that's where you have to be extremely careful, because when you set up a new team, you can get it very, very wrong. You can hire a bunch of new people, that in a growth environment don't have necessary support, and they just figure out on their own how to do this. And then you end up in this way of having micro cultures that are too different from each other. You're going to lose the consistency of the culture. And you don't get best practices because everyone is figuring out their own practices, whether they're best or not. That's why you have to have SWAT teams that are responsible for setting new teams. Like the main incubator of new teams in this company is expansion. Like expansion is the incubator that gives birth to every one of our new country teams. And if the country team is set up correctly, after that, the country team can hire by adding new people to an existing team, basically. So the foundation is built well, that culture, those best practices will scale better. Then you have a lot of different kinds of central functions. Like usually it's a lot about hiring the first person, like the first head of HR, the first person running analytics, the first person that's going to be responsible for your engineering, the first person running product. These are the truly difficult roles to get right, and it takes oftentimes trial and error. You don't get it right. You might even need different kinds of people along the journey. You need to bring people from the outside. You need to lift up people from the inside. Sometimes you first lift from the inside, then you recruit from the outside, and then you again lift up from the inside. So setting up those new teams, that's the difficult bit.
On difficult things, Evelyn is asking, what was your biggest failure moment, and how did you get through it?
Thinking that I had this childish belief that if you were able to order on a mobile phone from a restaurant or a cafe or for someone else, it would be a better customer experience. People would just do it because it was better, it was easier, it was on mobile and everything. And then I just learned, this is like what we launched originally, pickup. Like pickup is still 7-8% of our business. So people order in the app and they pick up the food that was prepared for the restaurant, like takeaway orders. But we thought it would be much bigger. And what we learned was that, what is truly the significance of doing something 10x better than what you used to do before? If you want to have a mass adoption in consumer behavior, you need to have comparatively, 5 to 10 times better of an, customer experience to the alternative. And the reality is that how most people go order, let's say, a takeaway coffee, is that they're like zombies. They come there, they're looking at their phone, they're like, oh, I need to order something, cappuccino, and then they're told that, okay, $2.50, and they pay for it. So they're not really actively, doing anything in that process. They're kind of like, living through their lives, thinking about other things. Delivery, on the other hand, like if you do it on mobile, quick experience, very transparent experience, restaurants that weren't used to be able on delivery, you're actually doing a 10x better experience. Hence, you get massive adoption. So I think product market fit is one of the things I've learned about the most. And we need to find product market fit like every city we go to, every country we go to. Like if this company knows something, it is about how to achieve product market fit over and over and over and over again. Because when we go to a new place, like no one knows about us and we have to figure out the way how to build success.
How do you, I mean, you've said this to me before and I've heard lots of other founders say it, kind of, your job is basically to always be the person who kind of doesn't know what they're doing, because as the company grows every few months or every few weeks or whatever, is a new company. So how, and you've never run that company before, so how the hell can you know what you're doing? Like how do you cope with that feeling possibly like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing all the time?
Yeah, I mean, the CEO is an extremely depressing job, because it's a job where you never know if you're doing a good job until too late. You usually know when you did a bad job. Like you know, there's never anyone who truly can tell you what you should be doing. There's a lot of opinions, but like no one can truly tell you that what's the case. The job changes usually every few months, at least every half a year. That also keeps it exciting. But what you're basically doing is that you're constantly sailing to the uncomfortability zone, you know, to do something you've never done before. You have no bloody idea, and you're just like, okay, let's start to crack this. And then when you figure it out, when you get comfortable with it, it's like, oh, time to move on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Like one of the best advice I got from my first chairman of the board in Slush, who told me that, you know, Miki, your job is not to be like a super soldier at the forefront, you know, waving your sword. Like your job is to, you know, build a team that succeeds without you. Your job is to make yourself redundant. Like you are successful as a CEO if you're not needed. That's your job, you know. And one of the best ways to measure that is, you know, go on vacation, go do fundraising, you know, disappear for a month or two from the business and see all the things that went, you know, broke, see all the things that, you know, went wrong, see all the things that you were anyway needed for. And those are the things you should probably, you know, figure out, because if they needed you, by definition, the company didn't, you know, it wasn't able to deal with those things on their own. So CEO's job is basically replacing themselves 100 times, 1,000 times. That's what you basically do, and it's a tough job because, like, you know, sometimes it's evident what you need to do, sometimes it's not evident. One saying I like is that, you know, when in doubt, just take the next small step forward. So there's a lot of these moments where you kind of know where you need to end up. It's a little bit fuzzy in the middle, but you usually have an idea about the next very small thing that you could be doing. So sometimes you just have to, you know, concentrate on the very next small step and, you know, trust that, you know, if I know around the direction I need to be going, you'll figure out the rest of the journey on the way. So it's a lot about like just dealing with uncertainty.
So Boris is asking, why did you decide you wanted to build this company? You're obviously a CEO of a quite different company before. Why? I mean, did you really pick this space? Was there some divine inspiration, or have you just sort of fallen into it?
Yeah, so the inspiration for Wolt started, so like I started in uni in 2009 and we founded Wolt in 2014. So those 5 years were kind of, you know, foundational for me to, you know, end up doing what I do. I realized very early in 2009 that, you know, we're kind of living through this fourth industrial revolution where the internet is the main proponent of change that is happening in our time. And I was like, I want to be a part of it. Like my biggest concern, you know, when I came to uni was that the world is already been defined, you know, the IBMs, the Microsofts and the Facebooks have already been founded. And we now get to live in this world defined by other people. And then I realized that this is not the case. Like this is still ongoing. This is still early. So what I did over those 5 years was just like maximize my own learning about, you know, the world of technology, the world of startups and scale-ups and entrepreneurs and investors and so forth. And people I met along those years ended up becoming my co-founders, my first employees, my early investors, you know, ultimately our industry that we chose, you know, our culture, our product, and so forth. One hypothesis I created over those years was that, you know, what's happening with the internet is that like every single thing in the world will be connected online. Every worker, every consumer, every business, every, you know, industrial machine will be, you know, producing data to some cloud that allows you to understand and optimize that and to build a better and more efficient business. My hypothesis was that this wave is going to go first through industries that are easier to replicate as pure digital experiences, streaming of music, streaming of movies and TV series. games, entertainment, news, like these kind of things where you can almost do like a pure digital experience. So there's less kind of like, slowing down factors from having something, very robust and physical happen as part of the equation. But over time, what's going to happen is that you're going to end up in all the difficult industries: manufacturing, services, retail, logistics, so forth. And my hypothesis was that as consumers, we'll most likely be connected to the internet through our phones. So, in a way, what's going to happen with the phone is that it's going to become like a remote controller with a button for all the things we do in life. And first, those buttons will be music and movies and news and entertainment and games. But eventually, they will also be like, our work, the restaurant, food, the things we want to get, clothes, like all of the other things. And I went to Supercell back in 2012 when it was an early stage gaming company, because I figured that, one of the best ways to learn how this is going to happen is to go work for a gaming company. There's actually a saying in gaming that, games and porn are the first two industries to take risk and try out something new, because they're like willing to take risk. They're always the first two to embrace like, a new technology, whether it's like, going to DVD or Blu-ray or streaming or something else. So I went to work for a mobile games company. And the way Supercell built games, like I worked on titles like Clash of Clans and Heyday, learning from incredibly experienced people, like I just breathed in the kind of the culture of the company, how to build product, what kind of small teams and so forth there were. And that's what we wanted to replicate at Wolt. And then when we founded Wolt, like my hypothesis was that like all of the physical services will also become like online services, buttons on the phone. And as the restaurant was the most frequent service, people eat 100 times a month, give or take. Restaurant industry is around half of consumption of food, half of spend on food. Food is around 10% of consumer spend on all things. I can figure that if you're able to nail the restaurant, take your foot between the door, start producing online sales to the restaurant, grow that share over time, you could, build a big business with the restaurant, but ultimately expand beyond the restaurant to other categories. So that's why we went for the restaurant. Like our initial hypothesis was, we want to take the restaurant online, we want to take the consumer online, we want to get the order online, we want to get the transaction online. If you have the order information, you can build like the Spotify type discovery for food. Based on data, what do people like? What kind of dishes, so forth.
Yeah, and obviously we've been through mega disruption recently. What do you think are going to be I've got questions about drones, I've got questions about robotic kitchens, I've got questions about 3D printing. What do you think is coming in the next few years that's actually going to have impact rather than sort of just sound a bit wacky and get some headlines?
So one thing I've learned about technology is that the S-curve is a really important thing to understand if you want to understand where the world is going. Like the S-curve says that there's first like a small bump of excitement, disappointment, a valley, and then kind of the true disruption. And like almost everything in technology works as an S-curve. People were so excited about the opportunities of the internet in the 90s and dot-com bubble. People were excited about the opportunities of mobile already in the early 2000s. Nothing really came out of that. And all the things that people dreamt up, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, started happening like 20, 30 years later. So I think like in technology, one of my favorite sayings is that there's a lot of not if, but when questions. I don't think it's a question of if, drones will become a massively important form of like transportation. I don't think it's a question of if there will be self-driving cars, that overtake like manual driving. I don't think it's an if that we will have flying vehicles that people will use for transportation. I don't think it's a question of if we will figure out things like cancer or even COVID-19. I think it's a question of when. And the question of when is much more interesting. And oftentimes, as coming back to the S-curve, people figure out that something is going to happen much earlier than it actually happens. It usually happens so much later than people think, whether it's VR or mobile gaming or internet e-commerce or autonomous vehicles or drones. So a lot of if, not if, but when questions. So my kind of answer is that I think it's going to happen and it's going to be bigger than any one of us understand. But it is likely to take longer than we think. And that's why I always try to follow these industries to understand, is the when close or is still farther away? Okay,
I have a final when, not if question for you, Miki, which is, when will you part ways with Wolt? What would be the signs for you that would say, okay, I've done my time here, I'm ready for something else? And what might that something else be?
So like the reason I'm doing Wolt and I'm focused on Wolt is that like I'm genuinely excited about what we're building. Like, I'm genuinely excited where we are going, what kind of a product and technology company we're building, what kind of a culture we have, what kind of a team we've been able to bring together. Like what I'm looking forward to is, I'm just curious. I want to see where this goes. I want to see like with this people, this culture, like all of these starting points that we worked our asses off to get to, like where this will lead. So curiosity is my main driving thing. When it comes to Wolt, like I get bored very easily. Like I haven't done so many things in my life for more than a few years. I left Slush after 4 years of scaling when it was the last year that we tripled. And I kind of saw that it doesn't make sense to triple anymore. And I was just for the enthusiasm and the excitement of tripling it and encountering all those difficult problems. And with Wolt, like we're again tripling this year, more than tripling. So we're in still that phase where everything changes, every 6 months or every year. So like for me, it's a new thing all the time. So I'm not like, from my perspective, I'm not looking forward to doing a new thing because I'm doing a new thing like constantly. So maybe at some point when it's not a new thing anymore, I want to do something else. But I don't think that's going to happen in a very short time based on what I know about our industry and our company.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Miki. I've been told that this has been a session with the record number of questions. So you obviously made it interesting. So thank you, Miki. Thank you everyone for listening, for all your great questions. I've been Amy Lewin. Please sign up to Sifted's newsletter for more stories from startups around Europe and insights from other excellent CEOs like Miki. So thanks very much.
First 3 deliveries free if you put in the code Miki, and I get 3 deliveries as well. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Amy.